look to starve the cancer essentially of its key fuels, and then the nuanced approach I'm adding to this approach is target the fungal pathogens I am arguing are the underlying driver of the disease.
Welcome back to another episode of the Peak Performance Life podcast. Today, I am very excited to have a man on the line who has some very unique points of view on one of the most important topics, something that has most likely affected someone that you know in your life as well, and that unfortunately is cancer. We have on the line with us Mark Lintern, and Mark is the author of the Cell Suppression Theory of Cancer. And he wants everyone to be clear, he never set out to write a new theory. He just had his own diagnosis of skin cancer, and his initial aim was to gain just enough insight to help reduce his risk of reoccurrence of that cancer. And by learning about the DNA mutations that allegedly caused his cancer. Now, detailed research led to an unplanned outcome and a concerning realization, and that is that cancer patients are in danger of being misinformed by a well-meaning medical community who seem to have misunderstood the cause of this complex disease. So, Mark, I'm really interested about this. You know, cancer is something that affected people in my family, people very close to me, friends. We know right now, in this moment, multiple people that are struggling to get through this. So thank you so much for joining us. We're always interested in hearing new perspectives and theories and different insights that could help people hopefully avoid this disease in the future. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, hi, Tyler. Thank you very much for having me on. It's great to talk with you.
Yeah, so let's just jump right into it and start with so you had your own experience. Why don't you tell people a little bit about your experience and how you kind of learned what you learned and came up with this theory that I'm sure we'll get into soon.
Okay. I was diagnosed with skin cancer and at a very young age, at 28, and I wanted to know more about it, and asking my oncologist and my GP which DNA mutations caused it. They couldn't tell me. So I thought, well, for the purposes of trying to avoid getting cancer again in the future, I wanted to do a bit of research. So I did a bit of research on what is now the somatic mutation theory, which is the primary theory that oncologists subscribe to, which suggests that DNA mutations cause the disease. I was just I had a good look at this theory, wanted to learn a bit more, and really to find out which mutations caused my particular cancer. I did about a 4-month deep dive into this, and I began to realize that it was very complex, and scientists were struggling through the lens of the DNA mutation theory, or the somatic mutation theory, to explain the disease. I also came across a number of other cancer theories that I didn't know existed, because I just assumed that, as we're often told, cancer is caused by DNA mutations. But it became apparent to me quite early on that actually there were a number of other theories out there, because the underlying cause of cancer is actually unknown. So this shocked me a little bit. And that set me on a course of further research, just looking into other treatments, because it turns out that a lot of the treatments that are produced, and I think this is really important to get across, a lot of the treatments that are developed are actually developed from cancer theory. So it's important to actually understand that there are several theories out there, because they offer different treatment options. So that was the first thing that really struck me from my initial research. But then I had my tumor removed and given essentially the all clear. I was lucky in that respect. And then a couple of years later, a friend of mine, she developed cervical cancer. And I then picked up the research baton again, knowing what I'd already researched, to try and help her. Now, unfortunately, she passed away within the year. She undertook conventional medicine, and throughout this whole period of the year, I did a much greater deep dive into the different theories, into different types of alternative and complementary treatments, just the options that were available, with the idea of trying to help her. As I say, unfortunately, she passed away. She was obviously reluctant to to take a look at the complementary and alternative side that I was pushing forward, because, it's a very scary area to be looking at when you have a diagnosis yourself. It's your life that's on the line. Anyway, she passed away, and I thought, well, I've done enough research here to highlight that there was other options available for cancer patients. So with the upset of losing Sam, a close friend, I thought, well, I'll just gather this information and put it in a small booklet that I could then give to other family and friends if they develop the disease, so they can read this information for themselves, and then they would get this understanding that there was other options available rather than just the standard of care. And then one thing led to another. As I was producing the booklet, I was doing more research. I started expanding my research to all sorts of aspects of disease and health in general. And after a period of time, I started coming across a number of correlations that were pointing to a different aspect of the disease or a different mechanism. And I stumbled across some information which then made me realize that there was a potential another mechanism responsible for the disease. And so 3 to 4 years turned into 8 years, and at the end of that, I ended up writing a brand new theory that identifies a completely different mechanism and a different paradigm to anything that's currently gone before. But other people have touched on this aspect that I'm going to be talking about, but the actual theory is a different paradigm, and I'll explain that shortly.
Amazing. I can't wait to hear it. Yeah, I've heard about a lot of different alternative cancer treatments, and I've heard people actually having quite success with them. But you're right. When you're talking with your oncologist, when you're talking with a doctor who supposedly treats hundreds or thousands of patients with the same thing, and they tell you, well, this is what you got to do, and otherwise you're not going to have long to live if you don't do it. It's a very scary thing. And even as someone else, right, like, I'm even afraid sometimes to tell people, hey, there are some alternative treatments, and right, because then it's like, oh, well, what if they do that instead of what their doctor said and it doesn't work? And then I'm, there's all sorts of different fears around here. And I find that most people just will go along with what the doctor says. And so in that case, we better hope the doctor's right. So yeah, I'm very curious to get into your theory and what you think the traditional ways that cancer is being dealt with right now, how that might be wrong, and what are some potentially better ways. But I guess we should start with your theory first.
Actually, I'd like to start with a number of other theories first, because my theory kind of leads on from one of the other main theories, which is the metabolic theory of cancer.
Sure.
Okay, just to preface that again, there's around 7 different theories of cancer. Now, it's important to understand them because, like I mentioned earlier, treatments are developed from cancer theory. So the reason why so many exist is because, quite simply, the primary or the established theory, which is we'll call it the DNA mutation theory, that remains unproven. There's a number of hallmarks that theory fails to explain. Now, the hallmarks there's around 10 of them. These are traits that are associated with the disease and recognized by scientists as key features of the disease. Now, these hallmarks are required to be explained by any particular theory. So we can garner the accuracy of any particular theory by how many of these hallmarks they can explain. So any theory that can explain all 10 of these hallmarks, which are, again, the key features of the disease and how it progresses, if that theory can explain all 10, then you're likely looking at a theory that has identified a key feature of the disease, if not the underlying mechanism driving it. Now, the issue I had when I was doing my research is that the vast majority of oncologists go into medical school and they're essentially taught that the DNA mutation theory is the most accurate, or the theory that explains the disease. And that is that cancer is a genetic disease, so DNA mutations give rise to abnormal growth. Now, when I've analysed this, and others may contend my analysis, the DNA theory struggles to explain more than 2 of the 10 hallmarks required. Now that sent alarm bells ringing for me, and that suggests one of two things. Either studying DNA is extremely complex and we cannot figure out the complexity yet, and cancer could well be a genetic disease in that respect. We just need to take more time to study this complex aspect, or cancer isn't a DNA mutation disease. That would explain why we can't currently explain the rest of the hallmarks. And when you go through the other theories, there's one theory in particular that tends to stand out, which is the metabolic theory of cancer. Now, the reason why that stands out is because it explains at least 7 of the 10 hallmarks. Now, that's important because that suggests that that theory is more accurate than the theory that most oncologists subscribe to and are using treatments from to treat patients. So if you're using treatments from the metabolic theory, you're more than likely, based on this analysis of the hallmarks, you're more than likely going to be using treatments that are going to be more effective than the DNA theory treatments, which are genetic-based treatments, simply because that's a more accurate theory. So it's very important to understand the difference, that there are these different theories out there and they offer these different treatment options. Now, there are other theories. I'll quickly run through them. There are many more than 7, but I've just chosen 7 because they seem to be the most plausible. So you've got the viral theory of cancer, you've got the atavistic theory, you've got the tissue organization field theory, the cancer stem cell theory, and the bacterial theory. And all these theories, they do play certain roles within cancer progression. So, for instance, the cancer stem cell theory identifies cancer stem cells as key cells within the body that seem to be associated with the unlimited growth potential of cancer. Now, again, the shortcoming I find with the DNA theory, and the reason why I carried on my research, was that proponents of the DNA theory, which is most oncologists, they don't seem to include the cancer stem cell theory and its approach to treating the disease within their treatments. So DNA-based genetic treatments do not tend to target cancer stem cells, but cancer stem cells are key superior cells within the body that are very good at expelling toxins so they can become resistant to chemotherapy, and they are the main factor that is seen as being the key cells that replicate and reproduce the tumor. So, for instance, you might have a course of chemotherapy, and I'm not saying chemotherapy is necessarily bad. It can be good in some circumstances, but generally the research I've looked at is that you may get an initial response to chemotherapy. However, that tends to reduce the tumor quite substantially, but that's targeting the regular cells in the body within the tumor. That can give the false impression that the treatment is working, but what can happen, and what has been shown in the medical literature, is that chemotherapy can stimulate the cancer stem cell, which then forces the cancer stem cell to reproduce itself, increasing the number of cancer stem cells available, and then those cancer stem cells then regenerate the tumor en masse. So there's a lot of important aspects about treatments that are used for the DNA theory that need to be taken into account in conjunction with the cancer stem cell theory and these other cells that are found within the tumor. So just quickly, the tissue organization field theory, that theory talks about the cells around the tumor and how they contribute to the growth of the tumor itself. But again, that theory is all about looking after the terrain of the body, the terrain of the organs. So you're reducing toxins, you're reducing inflammation. And that theory is trying to highlight basically that if you damage the terrain, you damage the cells around any particular group of cells, they lose these suppressive signals to stop growth. And as soon as they lose those signals, you then get the likelihood of excess growth with other cells and thus tumor growth. So With the tissue organization field theory, it's important to look at keeping the terrain healthy, nutritionally healthy, reducing those toxins. Now, of course, the issue I had again and the shortcoming with the DNA theory is that using toxic chemotherapy and radiotherapy damages the terrain. So there is that issue as well, and that needs to be taken into account, which is again a reason why we need to be looking at these other theories and what they're telling us about the micro and macro environment within and around the tumor. Now, the next theory is the metabolic theory, which I've already mentioned, and this theory is the rival theory essentially to the DNA theory, simply because, as I've already mentioned again, it explains at least 7 of the 10 hallmarks. Now, this is important because this theory has identified a consistency with the disease, and that is that the energy system of a cancer cell is different to that of a healthy cell. Now, this is consistent within all cancers. So you have abnormal metabolism, abnormal energy production. And this is something that Otto Warburg discovered in the 1920s, and then Professor Thomas Seyfried is now pushing this theory further to establish therapies with the metabolic theory. So this is interesting because with the 10 hallmarks I explained earlier, that suggests that cancer follows a consistent path. Now, this is important because the metabolic theory is identifying that this energy switch happens in all cancers, so it's trying to explain this consistency that cancer follows. Now, a lot of people will say cancer is in many different diseases, but because of these 10 hallmarks, every solid tumor follows this particular path. So therefore, you have this consistency, which suggests that there is a consistency behind the disease or a consistent factor driving the disease. And this is where the metabolic theory shines in that respect, because it's saying that mitochondria, which are one part of the energy system, they're damaged, and then that causes a switch to the backup energy system of glycolysis, and then that leads to cancer. That's it in its simplistic form. Now, again, the shortcoming I have with the DNA theory is that the DNA mutations which are said to be driving the disease appear to be completely random, even within the same tumor. From one cancer cell to another, they are random within the same tumor. So that doesn't fit with the DNA theory in the sense that it suggests that there needs to be a pattern of specific mutations that drive the disease, and we're not seeing that pattern. So this was thought to be the case up until about 2013, when DNA sequencing data confirmed the utter randomness of the mutations. So that's a major problem with the DNA theory. Now, where my theory comes in is that the metabolic theory, which suggests that mitochondria, an energy organelle within the cell, is damaged, and that causes this major energy switch and then cancer. I'm coming in with a theory highlighting that actually there's another explanation for this energy shift. Now, this energy shift is called the Warburg effect, named after Otto Warburg, who discovered it in 1920. So this Warburg effect is this shift in energy. I'm highlighting that there's a completely different mechanism that can explain this shift in the Warburg effect, and that this Warburg effect is key to understanding the underlying cause of cancer, because all the rest of the hallmarks that develop into cancer seem to follow this Warburg effect, this change in energy. So I'm offering an additional interpretation of the metabolic theory, which is currently the most accurate, 7 out of 10 hallmarks at bare minimum, it explains. I'm offering a different explanation for the Warburg effect, because my research has found that actually it doesn't appear as though mitochondria are damaged, as the metabolic theory suggests. It appears as though mitochondria are actually suppressed. Now, I came up with this idea of suppression rather than damage causing the disease because I came across a paper, an infectious paper, which was highlighting how pathogens invade cells and how cells respond to pathogens. Fungal pathogens in particular, when a cell acknowledges a fungal pathogen is about to invade, it switches off the primary energy system, which is the mitochondria, in favor of using the oxygen that mitochondria use to produce energy, to use that oxygen to combat the pathogen, invading pathogen. So effectively, what's happening is the mitochondria are intentionally switching their energy system to the backup energy system so they can use oxygen in order to combat the pathogen. So I'm saying it's a suppressive mechanism. So when you then look at the involvement of fungal pathogens in particular, you see that they can block other cell death mechanisms and other features of the 10 hallmarks, and essentially explain all of those 10 hallmarks with this interaction they have with the cell. So effectively, I'm providing a different paradigm, a suppression paradigm, that puts fungal pathogens essentially at the core of suppressing key factors of the cell. They invade the cell and they're intracellular, and that interaction with the cell trying to fight against the pathogen for control leads to all the symptoms of cancer itself.
Very interesting. And so from what I've experienced, from what I've just seen from people around me, it seems like chemo and immunotherapy, I guess if I'm saying that correctly, chemo and immunotherapy seem to be the things that are most widely used. At least that's what I've heard about from multiple people that was recommended as a course of action for them to take. Chemo, and now recently the immunotherapy, and then someone I know, if they have like an autoimmune disease, then they have to be careful with the immunotherapy, which could overstimulate their immune system and cause a huge flare up of the autoimmune disease. So there's a lot of critics about both chemo and immunotherapy. Those are those both based on the DNA theory? Why those are being recommended? Do you
know? Chemotherapy certainly, because the idea behind that is to target fast developing cells. So cells that duplicate quite rapidly, they're going to be, they produce a second cell. And as they do that process of producing a second cell, the DNA, which is split in two and then taken across to both cells, is at its weakest state during that process of duplication. So the toxic compounds in chemotherapy are absorbed by these fast developing cells and can target the weaker elements of the DNA at that point in order to arrest development. So certainly chemotherapy. Immunotherapies tend to focus more on stimulating the immune system to improve the immune response. So taking, say, a T cell from a cancer patient, removing that from the body, reconfiguring it so it can identify particular antigens on the actual cancer cell itself, so that it recognizes the cancer cell, and then reintroducing that into the body. So you're essentially improving the specificity of the immune cells. Now that, like you said, it can cause particular issues with, it can see the cancer cells more efficiently and target them. It has been successful in some cases, but by and large, there are problems with it in terms of it can cause autoimmune disease by overstimulating the immune system. So yes, it's more based on the immunotherapy side of things, the stimulating the immune system, as opposed to targeting DNA specifically.
Got it. So tell us a little bit more about your theory and how the treatment, if your theory is correct, how the treatment would or should be different.
Okay, well, I mean, there's a lot more to cancer than just these particular theories. For instance, if we go along the lines of the tissue organization field theory, which is talking about the terrain, when we talk about the terrain, we need to also be talking about the microbiome. And that's in relation to my theory as well, because we're dealing with pathogens. So I would suggest essentially what you want to be doing, and I'm not a clinician, so this is just information. I'm not giving it out medical advice, of course. You want to be addressing the terrain first and foremost. You want to be getting rid of the toxins. You want to be eating good organic food, possibly supplementing if you have a nutrient deficiency. So you want to reduce inflammation in the body. Second, you really want to be looking after the microbiome. The microbiome is actually key when it comes to disease, because it's been shown that particular fungal pathogens that exist within the gut microbiome can generate inflammation throughout the body, in particular the lungs, and actually cause disease from the gut to occur in the lungs. So you want to really rebalance the microbiome, because the beneficial bacteria will be there to be able to look after and negate any excessive growth of bad pathogens, basically, which are going to cause all manner of issues, in particular cancer, as I'm trying to point out here. So terrain, microbiome, so of course eating healthily, and then the other side of it would be to take an approach similar to the metabolic theory. So the metabolic theory is all about essentially trying to starve the cancer cell of its primary fuel. And the metabolic theory highlights that this energy shift that occurs within cancer means that glucose and glutamine are the primary fuels that are being absorbed by the vast majority of cancers. Now, the vast majority of cancers are carcinomas. They form around 85% of all cancers. And they form in epithelial cells, which essentially are the main key cells that revert to glycolysis, this backup energy system. So it's important to consider fasting, exercise, a ketogenic diet, potentially using off-label drugs such as metformin or even berberine, a natural a way to reduce the glucose within the bloodstream. So it's really targeting the glucose and the glutamine. And Professor Seyfried does go into quite a lot of detail on his podcasts about how to target glutamine specifically. There are issues with glutamine because it is required for the immune system. So I cover this in a bit more detail in my book. But there has been cases where people have supplemented with glutamine, and that's actually been more beneficial for particular cancers, because you're actually benefiting the microbiome and you're benefiting the immune system at the same time. But when you're doing that, you obviously need to pay attention to the glucose. So trying to starve the cancer cell of the glucose it's absorbing. Now, this is not going to be perfect for every cancer at every stage, because they do vary in their metabolic profile. So again, these are generalized responses. So first of all, it's terrain. Look at, after that, the microbiome. Look to starve the cancer essentially of its key fuels, and then the nuanced approach I'm adding to this approach is target the fungal pathogens I am arguing are the underlying driver of the disease. So I'd like to say it's as simple as just using an antifungal drug, but that can be effective and has been shown to be effective in a number of in vivo studies and case studies with humans. However, antifungal drugs are toxic and they do not target every particular type of fungal pathogen. So there's a nuance to this. There are a number of off-label drugs. For instance, I've already mentioned metformin, atorvastatin, mebendazole, which is an antiparasitic drug, even doxycycline, which is an antibacterial drug. These are 4 drugs that are used by a private clinic in the UK called the Care Oncology Clinic, which works alongside the NHS. They provide these drugs, these off-label drugs, to cancer patients to mainly target the metabolism of the cells. But what we find is when we look at these 4 drugs in particular, and many of the other off-label drugs that appear to be effective, they are actually all antifungal. So I'm trying to present this new lens through which to view cancer, and that is that, hey guys, there's all this other stuff we're doing is great, but there's this antifungal, or there's this fungal aspect to the disease that needs to be addressed more, because we're already addressing it inadvertently with some of the treatments that we're providing. Maybe it's this antifungal aspect which is actually generating the benefit that we're seeing. But if we actually try and target the pathogens more specifically, we might have a much better outcome than what we're doing at the moment. So with that, the idea would be taking a number of tests to try and establish which particular pathogens, fungal pathogens, are present within the body. And then once you do that, and if you can identify which pathogens are present within the tumor, you're more likely to be able to target the specific pathogens that are driving or manipulating the disease and have a better survival outcome.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Everything you're saying is literally right in line with a lot of the stuff I've been learning and hearing about recently. And again, I do want to reiterate, we're not medical doctors. This is not medical advice. We're just talking. Mark has done a lot of research, basically dedicated many, many years of his life to doing this research. So recently, I'm not going to say any names or anything like that, obviously, but I know someone who was basically told that they have a few months to live, and they, through someone else that we know, made them aware of, have you heard of the Tippin's protocol?
Yeah.
Which is kind of similar. Yep. So you've heard of that. So it's very similar to what you're saying. And so they kind of said, they gave him metformin, right, to try to, unfortunately, the patient wouldn't follow a ketogenic type of diet, kind of like an old school guy who's set in his ways of how he's going to eat. But They put him on metformin. He did some rounds of doxycycline, fenbendazole, ivermectin, and literally within a matter of months, that he has a few months to live to this is a miraculous recovery. And he literally was on his deathbed almost, practically, and feeling horrible, to now complete turnaround, and he looks and feels just as good as he's ever been. And this is someone who's in his late 80s now, by the way.
Wow.
And I thought this is just absolutely miraculous. And again, it's been something, I'm so glad we're having this conversation, because I want people to know about this, but I've been very hesitant to talk about it because, again, I'm not a doctor. These are prescription medications. Most doctors won't prescribe this. Most oncologists will probably say you're a quack if you talk about this kind of stuff. Hopefully not. And so I've now seen two people, so I don't have much of a sample size, but two people that I know who have had incredible results, and basically their cancers are gone using this protocol. It's pretty incredible.
That is incredible. And I think it's worth pointing out that we're not saying here that particular protocol will be guaranteed to benefit everyone, because everyone is different. It depends on what stage your cancer is at, what blood group you've got, how healthy your microbiome is. There are a number of issues. So that protocol might not work for some. However, I've been in contact with a lot of people now since publishing my book and my theory last year. I've got a Facebook group where we discuss my theory in the group, and there's a lot of people in that group who are treating themselves or they're treating a family member. And they've been researching the disease and various treatments for a long time before they've even entered my group. So they're very, very knowledgeable. And what I'm seeing is and from a number of other groups as well, what I'm seeing is that there is a pattern. And it's a very similar pattern to the one you're describing. And that is that there is hope, because there are a number of other protocols that appear to be effective. And like I say, fenbendazole is an antiparasitic drug, but it's also antifungal. So pretty much all of those drugs that you mentioned, including ivermectin, I believe. I mean, I need to do a bit more research on ivermectin, but I believe it is antifungal to a certain degree. So there is this correlation with these specific protocols that is highlighting that there is this almost like pointing down a particular route. So, for instance, glioblastoma is pretty much a death sentence when you get it. And I've got a number of people in the group who've shared their protocols with me of now they are no evidence of disease from following this protocol. And it's all to do with, obviously, looking after the terrain. So good food, organic food, getting rid of inflammation, as we've already discussed. Looking at the metabolism of the cell, again, so potentially doing a ketogenic diet. But the thing that stood out for me was there were about 3 antiparasitic drugs and 3 antifungal drugs that were used in this protocol these few people were actually using. And it's because of that particular protocol that appears to be effective in that instance. And it's been effective for a number of these patients for a disease that is essentially incurable. So there's definitely something in it which is essentially why I ended up writing the theory I did. And when I found that I did identify fungal pathogens as the underlying cause, I was able to explain all of these 10 hallmarks. But not only that, as I was doing my research, I came across a lot of other key features of cancer that aren't classed as official hallmarks, but they're associated with most cancers, like iron overload, for instance. These things aren't explained by many of the main theories. They understand that iron is required for the body, but in excess it can be almost a carcinogen. They're looking at actually classing iron as a carcinogen in excess, but they can't explain why. So there's around 20 of these, and I thought to myself, well, if I'm going to write a theory and it's going to be a theory that is worth listening to and trying to grasp and understand, and if it's potentially going to identify a key mechanism, I've got to explain all these other aspects, all these other 20, if it holds any weight. And I've done that. So there's another 20 aspects of the disease I can explain. So it provides this almost like a meta theory of all the other theories and explains all the key features of all the other theories that aren't currently explained. So it just highlights that there's this draw to this suppression idea and this idea of fungal pathogens sequestering the cell and the nutrients from the cell and messing around with the metabolism leading to the disease. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. Another thing that's really fascinating is that these alternative, the Tippin's protocol things that I just mentioned, number one, to my knowledge, and in the again, I have a small sample size, 2 people, no side effects whatsoever. Cost is, we're talking hundreds of dollars versus however much, they're billing medical insurance for treating cancer patients, which could be tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars in some cases, right? We're talking about a solution that essentially, so far, I have not seen any side effects. These compounds, these prescription drugs seem to be have a record of being as safe as Tylenol, is what a good friend of mine who's heavily researched them told me. And it's just pretty fascinating that it's not being talked about more, especially with so many people having so much success with it. I'm just curious why. I mean, I guess there's a lot less money in treating it this way. I hate to think that that's the only answer, but yeah, I'm just really wondering why this is not more mainstream yet. And hopefully your book and this podcast is helping to make these things more mainstream. And again, this is so people can make their own educated decision. But I think there's a lot of alternative solutions. So yeah, I'm really glad that you wrote your book, which, by the way, I'm sure people listening now will want to know, where can they get your book? Where can they learn more from you if they have a family member or someone close to them or themselves are dealing with this?
Okay, yeah, thank you. The book is called The Cancer Resolution, and it's currently available on Amazon. I also have a website which provides some free information, a PDF, a synopsis of the theory, so you can download that first for free and get a basic overview of the theory. And the website is cellsuppression.com. And I have a Facebook group as well, so you're very welcome to join that group and converse with a number of the people that are in the group as well. I'm quite active within that group.
What's that Facebook group called? Or how can they find it?
If you just type in Mark Lintern Theory Discussion Facebook group, that should get you to the group. It's linked on my website page as well. So
excellent. So what piece of advice would you have for people who maybe have a family member, someone close to them, or maybe themselves, they're dealing with this? What would you want to leave them hearing this podcast and walk away, leaving them understanding or hearing, or yeah?
Just that there's hope, because the most oncologists are viewing the disease through the lens of the DNA mutation theory, and it's very narrow in terms of how it understands or views the disease and the treatments that are offered by it. because these other theories are available, they're offering different treatments, so there are other options. So my advice would be, please don't despair if you're given a negative diagnosis, negative prognosis. There are a number of books that I list within my book that you should probably read, and also my book, obviously, because I've actually written the book for the layperson. I wrote it for my mum and dad to understand. So I translate all the science into bring it into the public domain, so it's easy to understand, or as easy as it can be to understand. So it's really just educate yourself on a number of those books, and mine, and then converse with your oncologist. Always converse with a medical professional, and ask them questions based on the metabolic theory, based on my theory, based on the other theories that are out there, and to see what their response is in terms of, can they supply you with the sort of treatments that those theories support. And it's really just find out a bit more information and understand the basic premise of that you can look after the terrain of your body, you can look after the microbiome, you can use off-label drugs, you can target metabolism, because as the metabolic theory suggests that cancer is actually a metabolic disease. Obviously, I'm suggesting it's similar to a metabolic disease, but it's through this mechanism of fungal pathogens driving the cell. But the point being that there are these other more powerful theories out there, and other aspects of the cell you can target in addition to targeting the DNA genes in the cell. So certainly look at all the other information that is out there.
Amazing. And, one of the challenges that I'm finding, for example, someone that I just heard of recently, kind of a friend of a friend, who it's kind of hard for me to be like, oh, did they hear about this? Oh, they should take this. And here's some, they could buy these things off label through this, it's kind of hard to say that kind of thing. So my question is, are there providers out there? Are there medical professionals out there? Or maybe there's resources in your books or in your Facebook group where if someone wants to pursue this alternative method, they can actually have a medical professional who's knowledge about it and help work with them to get these things, right? Because typically you need a prescription to get these things, unless you're kind of doing them in a way that's not ideal.
Yeah, there's a number of functional medicine doctors. Dr. Naisha Winters is a fantastic advocate for this side of things, and she's building a hospital herself at the moment. She is able to prescribe treatments associated with the metabolic side of treatment. You've also got a great charity in the UK, a number of charities, in fact, but Yes to Life in the UK it provides resources to identify particular clinicians that can help utilize conventional and complementary treatments together. So there's a plethora of information at these particular places. I do list some more on my website. You can go to these places and they will provide you. They've got hotlines, they've got emails, they've got people on board who can advise and point you in the right direction. So you're not alone with this. There is a massive amount of information there. I would say go to maybe look up Naisha Winters, Dr. Naisha Winters, and look up the Yes to Life charity in the UK, and similar charities in the US, of course.
Excellent. I think that's great. I think there's a huge need for this. As a matter of fact, one of my friends who is a very, very successful kind of biotech, really heavily into medicine as well, and alternative medicines and things like that. He's the one that's been telling everyone we know about the Tippin's protocol and how it's helped people that he knows. And then, he's even been looking into, there's a real need here for some sort of medical professional to, whether it be some sort of telemedicine or maybe that's not the right word, but some medical professional who here in the States, people can go and see and get these prescription medications that are very, very cheap, seem to have no side effects, and, seem to have many cases where they have worked for people. Again, this is not medical advice. We're not claiming there's no cure. We're not claiming that we're curing cancer or anything like that, but there are alternative solutions that have worked for many people. And, unfortunately, most people, especially most very elderly people, are not going to scour the internet, researching things, finding groups. Hopefully they're listening to this podcast and getting some of your resources and checking out your book, but it's, most people are not gonna do that. Or luckily, a few people have, like yourself, done the research and scoured the internet and found these groups and created your own groups. And I think that's wonderful. And I think the more we can spread the word about this, and I hope this podcast has helped to do that. So I really want to thank you, Mark, for the work that you're doing and the work that you're putting out there in the world, and the people that hopefully will be helped from it.
Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure talking with you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I highly encourage everyone, check out his website, cellsuppression.com, grab his book. You can find his Facebook group in there as well. If you or someone you know is going through this situation, hopefully this helps you in some way. So thank you, Mark, so much for joining us, and I hope we can do it again sometime.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, can you please leave us a rating or review and subscribe? I've realized that while we have actually increased our downloads a lot, we're actually getting a lot of downloads, which I'm really happy about. We actually have very few ratings. And I realized that I've never asked people really to rate much. So I'm asking you now if you could please rate and review and subscribe. And if you enjoyed the episode, please forward it along to anyone that you think will get value out of this. Also, if you haven't checked out our line of products at buypeakperformance.com, you get 20% off your first order. That's www.buypeakperformance.com. We have some incredible products, including our organic high-altitude coffee. If you don't know this, coffee is one of the most heavily sprayed with pesticides out of any crop. So it's really important that you drink organic coffee. We've gone above and beyond to source what we believe is the highest quality and healthiest organic coffee in the world. We're also famous for our organic green superfood powder. You can get 20% off of that as well at buypeakperformance.com. We also have an organic vegan and paleo plant protein. See, most of the vegan proteins out there are using brown rice protein, which is really not a good source of protein, and it's also a grain. And if you're paleo, you know that grains tend to cause inflammation in some cases for some people. And so we wanted to make one that was paleo friendly and vegan and organic. We made an amazing amino acid profile, so it's really one of the best plant proteins for muscle building. So you can check out Peak Performance Organic Plant Protein. You can find that on our website. Of course, all our products are on Amazon as well. So thanks again. And again, please, if you enjoyed the episode, please forward it along to someone who you feel can get value out of it. And please leave us a rating, review, and subscribe. Thank you.